In 2025, Amazon pulled in an $80 billion operating profit.
Right, which is just massive.
Yeah, I mean, it was an absolute banner year by almost any traditional corporate metric. But if you actually peer into their bank account, their free cash flow didn't just take a little dip. It plunged by $27 billion.
Wow. Yeah, that's a cliff.
Exactly. So today we're breaking down the 2025 annual report to figure out how one of the world's most profitable companies is, well, deliberately and aggressively draining its own checking account.
It's really the ultimate financial paradox. Because you look at the headline numbers and Wall Street is cheering.
Right.
But then you look at the cash flow statement and it looks like a fire alarm is going off. But piecing together why that's happening, it actually reveals the blueprint for the next decade of the global economy.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. For you listening, you're someone who wants the signal through the noise, so we've done the heavy lifting for you. We're pulling apart one of the most complex corporate machines on Earth.
It really is a machine.
It is, and we're using Amazon's 2025 annual report to do it. That includes CEO Andy Jassy's latest shareholder letter, the incredibly dense 2025 Form 10-K, and they've even attached the original 1997 Jeff Bezos letter.
Which is such a great inclusion.
Right. It serves as this fascinating Rosetta Stone for everything they're doing almost 30 years later.
Yeah, because the sheer volume of data in a modern mega-cap 10K can be, well, completely paralyzing.
Oh, absolutely.
But our goal here is to decode the mechanisms behind those numbers. We need to understand not just what they're selling, but how the underlying engine actually generates wealth.
And why that engine currently requires just a historic amount of capital.
Exactly.
So to understand that paradox, the $80 billion in profit versus the disappearing cash, we really have to establish a baseline of what this company is in 2025. Because if you still think of Amazon as just the everything store where you buy like a toaster and some paper towels, you're missing the plot entirely.
Yeah, that's really an outdated view.
It is. When you look at the product ecosystem today, the retail footprint is almost just the tip of the spear. I mean, we know about the electronic devices, right? Kindles, Echoes, Ring cameras.
Right, the hardware.
Yeah, and we know about the massive grocery footprint with Whole Foods and Amazon Fresh, plus pharmacy and Prime Video. But the real gravity is AWS.
Amazon Web Services, yeah.
Exactly. Their cloud compute, storage, databases, and crucially, these custom AI chips with names like Trainium and Graviton.
The retail side gets all the consumer attention, but it's really just the onboarding mechanism at this point. Once they have you in the ecosystem, the definition of what constitutes a product completely shifts.
Yeah, and speaking of shifting products, I'm looking at this initiative, Amazon Leo, which is officially launching in mid-2026.
Oh, yeah, this is a huge one.
It's wild. This isn't a retail product. This is a low Earth orbit satellite network. They already have over 200 satellites floating in space right now, and the goal is to bring high-speed broadband to rural areas.
It's basically a space telecom play.
Right. And they aren't just selling a dish to someone off the grid. Delta Airlines has already signed up to put Amazon Leo receivers on 500 planes starting in 2028.
Which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, it turns a logistics and retail company into a global telecom provider.
Which perfectly illustrates the way they view their customer base.
Yeah.
They don't just have one demographic. They actually have 5 distinct, massive customer pillars.
Okay, break those down for us.
Sure. So first, you have the traditional consumers, right? The ones hunting for fast delivery via Prime.
The people buying the paper towels.
Exactly. But the second pillar is the sellers. These are millions of independent businesses utilizing Amazon's marketplace and their fulfillment network.
Got it.
Then the third is developers and enterprises. And this is everyone from like a 2-person AI startup in a garage all the way up to the CIA using AWS to run their operations.
Wow. From a garage to the CIA.
Right. Then fourth, you have content creators. So authors, Twitch streamers, podcasters. And the fifth, which is arguably the most lucrative right now, is advertisers. They're buying up sponsored ads and video spots.
So when you lay it out like that, I mean, having a billion shoppers isn't just about selling those shoppers a physical product.
No, not at all.
It's about selling the attention of those shoppers to the advertisers. The retail store operates almost like a loss leader to feed the ad business.
Precisely.
But it forces me to ask, how does a single executive team manage a logistics company, a grocery chain, a cloud provider, a Hollywood studio, and a telecom network without the whole thing just collapsing under its own weight.
I mean, from the outside, it looks completely chaotic.
Right, it sounds impossible.
But, the 10K reveals the underlying mechanic here. These aren't disparate businesses operating in silos. They're interconnected pieces of a highly calibrated flywheel.
Okay.
And managing them requires a monetization strategy that balances low-margin volume with high-margin toll booths.
Okay, let's actually walk through that machine. Because the 2025 profitability drivers show exactly how they monetize this ecosystem. How do all these revenue streams interact?
Well, so the retail side is, actually warehousing, packing, and shipping a physical item. That's a remarkably low-margin business.
The overhead has to be huge.
Oh, the costs are astronomical.
Okay.
But what it does is it drives massive volume and keeps consumers eventually returning to the site. And once the traffic is there, the high-margin businesses kick in.
Like what? Give me an example.
Take third-party seller services. So Amazon allows other businesses to sell on their platform, and in return, Amazon takes a commission and a fulfillment fee. So they're generating revenue without ever taking on the inventory risk. I mean, if 1 million third-party sweaters don't sell, Amazon doesn't have to discount them and take the loss. They just collected the rent for the shelf space.
Oh, that's brilliant. And then layered on top of that rent is the advertising overlay. Because, if a user searches for running shoes on Amazon, that isn't just a search query. That is incredibly high-intent commercial real estate. So charging a shoe brand to be the first result on that page is essentially pure profit. There are no shipping costs associated with a sponsored ad.
You've hit on the exact reason their margins are expanding so fast. And beyond the retail platform, you have AWS, which operates as an on-demand utility model.
You pay for what you use.
Exactly. You pay for the computing power you consume. It's a B2B revenue stream with software-like margins. And finally, you wrap all of this up in the Amazon Prime subscription.
Right, the magical Prime button.
Yeah, because Prime is the psychological moat. Once a consumer prepays for shipping, they actively look for reasons to buy everything through Amazon just to justify the sunk cost of the subscription.
It's so true. I do that all the time, which brings us to a fascinating inclusion in this 2025 report. They attach the original 1997 Jeff Bezos shareholder letter every single year.
Yeah, it's a great tradition.
It really is. And reading it today, you realize the operational philosophy hasn't budged an inch in nearly 3 decades.
Not at all.
Because back in 1997, Bezos explicitly warned Wall Street. He said Amazon will always prioritize long-term market leadership and future free cash flow over optimizing short-term earnings.
Yeah, no dressing up the gap, accounting for a good quarter.
Right.
That 1997 letter is essentially their corporate constitution. And, Andy Jassy leans heavily on it in his 2025 commentary to explain their multiple parallel paths strategy.
Explain that a bit.
Well, when they see a massive consumer need, they refuse to pick just one solution and hope it works. Instead, they build multiple aggressively expensive solutions simultaneously.
So a perfect example of that from the report is their approach to delivery speed. They know consumers are increasingly impatient.
Very impatient.
Right. But instead of debating in a boardroom whether drones or local warehouses are the future, they're just funding both. They're building out Prime Air for sub-30-minute drone delivery. And at the exact same time, they're scaling Amazon Now, which is 20-minute delivery from local micro-fulfillment centers.
Yeah, that's already taking off in places like India and the UAE.
Exactly. And on top of that, they're still building massive same-day fulfillment centers across the U.S.
See, if a traditional retailer tried to throw billions at 3 overlapping, highly experimental logistics networks all at once, their board would fire the CEO for bleeding margins.
Oh, instantly.
Yeah. But Amazon's structure allows them to absorb the inefficiency. They build all of them, see which ones gain traction, and then integrate the winners, because they know the combination of these paths will fundamentally change what customers consider normal delivery.
But here's the thing. If their strategy is to throw billions at overlapping logistics networks, you would expect their margins to be razor thin. But when you open the actual 2025 ledger, the exact opposite is happening.
Right, the numbers are wild.
Let's look at the scorecard for 2025 versus 2024 because it's staggering. In 2025, Amazon's net sales hit $717 billion. That's a 12% jump from the $638 billion they did in 2024.
Huge growth on a massive base.
Yeah. But the operating income, the actual profit generated from running the business, that jumped 17%. From $69 billion up to $80 billion.
The crucial part of that jump, though, is dissecting where those profits actually materialized.
Right.
Because the 10K breaks the business down into three main segments: North America, International, and AWS. Let's start with North America. Operating income there rose from $25 billion in 2024 to $29.6 billion in 2025.
So that's almost a $5 billion jump in profit just in their home market.
Exactly.
And the sources point to three specific drivers for that: sheer unit volume, a massive spike in advertising revenue, and more sales shifting to third-party sellers, which, perfectly validates what we were just talking about.
It really does.
The more they shift the mix away from selling their own inventory and towards selling ads and taking those third-party commissions, the wider their profit margins get.
And the international segment actually mirrors that exact same margin expansion. Operating income grew from $3.79 billion to $4.75 billion.
Okay.
And the underlying drivers were identical, right? Unit sales and ads. But the 10K also notes a very specific macro factor here. They benefited from a favorable $903 million boost simply due to shifting foreign exchange rates.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a weaker dollar makes international revenues look larger when they're converted back.
Well, that's a nice accounting tailwind, but it's not the core engine.
No.
The core engine, like the absolute crown jewel, is AWS. Operating income for the cloud division surged from $39.8 billion to $45.6 billion. The revenue alone grew 20% to hit $129 billion.
And getting 20% growth on a base of over $100 billion, that is notoriously difficult to achieve.
Right. It takes something massive.
Yeah, it requires a tectonic shift in demand,
Mm-hmm.
which of course is the artificial intelligence boom.
And the sources highlight just a jaw-dropping comparison to illustrate the speed of this AI wave.
Okay.
If you go back to the early days of AWS, 3 years after it launched, it had reached a $58 million revenue run rate.
And that was considered wildly successful back then.
Totally. But today, we're roughly 3 years into the generative AI wave, and AWS's AI revenue run rate isn't in the millions. It is over $15 billion.
Wow. Yeah, it is an adoption curve unlike anything in modern business history. I mean, Jazzy points out that ChatGPT reached 100 million users in 2 months. That's 4 times faster than TikTok.
That's insane.
Right. And he actually compares the advent of AI to the invention of electricity. But the critical difference here is that electricity took 40 years to fundamentally reorganize society.
Because they had to physically build everything.
Exactly. Factories had to be physically redesigned to utilize electric motors instead of, like, steam shafts. But the AI revolution is moving 10 times faster because the distribution network, the internet, it already exists.
Which brings us crashing into our opening hook.
Ah, yes. The paradox.
Right. If the machine is engineered this perfectly, and if they're squeezing more margin out of retail through ads, and AWS is riding this $15 billion AI rocket ship, how do we reconcile the free cash flow? It's the big question.
Because the 2025 annual report explicitly states that free cash flow dropped from $38 billion in 2024 down to just $11 billion in 2025. That is a $27 billion crater in their actual cash generation. Where did the money go?
So the answer lies in a line item called capital expenditures, or CapEx.
Right.
See, to capture that $15 billion in AI revenue, Amazon cannot just flip a switch in a software dashboard. Cloud computing at the AI scale requires staggering physical infrastructure. They have to lay out physical cash 6 to 24 months in advance of ever billing a customer.
Right, so they're buying land, securing gigawatts of power from utility companies, building concrete data centers, and manufacturing massive quantities of specialized AI chips.
Yes, all of the above.
I was actually looking at the CapEx numbers. In 2025, Amazon increased its capital expenditures by an astonishing $50.7 billion year over year. Their total CapEx spend was $128.3 billion. And most of that $128 billion went directly into property and equipment to support AWS and AI.
It's like a national grid operator, right?
That's a great way to think about it.
They can't wait for a new city to be fully populated before they start buying land for the power plants. They have to spend tens of billions laying high-voltage lines in empty fields, betting that a metropolis will eventually spring up around it.
Exactly.
That's what Amazon is doing with AI right now. Their overall wealth, their operating profit is going up on paper, but their checking account is drained because they are paying construction crews and chip fabricators every single day.
The grid operator analogy is spot on. The wealth isn't vanishing, It's just being locked up in the construction phase of a new utility. And, Jassie's justification for draining the cash reserves is uncompromising.
He's not apologizing for it.
No, not at all. They're operating in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime land rush. They're custom AI chips, like Trainium, which are designed to offer better price performance than standard off-the-shelf GPUs. They're seeing demand that just vastly outstrips their ability to manufacture them.
The sources even mention that if Amazon's custom chip business was spun out as a standalone company selling to third parties, it would have a $50 billion run rate on its own.
That's incredible. And by building their own silicon instead of solely relying on third-party vendors, they estimate they'll eventually save tens of billions of dollars in future CapEx.
So it's an investment.
Exactly. They are taking the massive cash hit today to build a structural cost advantage for tomorrow. It's really the purest expression of that 1997 philosophy. Take the short-term pain, suppress the cash flow, and secure the infrastructure for the next century of computing.
But reading through the report, it is clear that 2025 wasn't just a story of flawless execution.
Oh, definitely not.
Jassy specifically talks about how progress is rarely a straight line. He actually references an album by the indie band The Beths titled Straight Line Was a Lie.
I love that he put that in there.
Yeah, me too. And if you dig into the income statement, you see some serious friction points. Because mega-cap tech companies usually try to bury their mistakes, but Amazon actually spills out 3 massive profit-draining headwinds they had to absorb in 2025.
Because growth at this scale inevitably generates friction.
Right.
The first headwind was a $2.5 billion charge in the third quarter to settle a lawsuit with the Federal Trade Commission.
Which frankly feels like standard regulatory table stakes when you reach a $2 trillion market cap.
Yeah, the cost of doing business.
But the second friction point stood out to me. They recorded $2.7 billion in severance costs due to planned role eliminations. I thought they had already gone through their massive post-pandemic layoffs and flattened the organization back in 2023. So why are they paying nearly $3 billion to reorganize again?
Well, because the nature of the work is shifting so violently due to AI, they're actually forcing the company to reflatten. Jassy is obsessed with preventing Amazon from becoming a slow, bureaucratic incumbent.
He wants them to stay hungry.
Exactly. They are actively eliminating layers of middle management so they can act like a nimble startup. So the severance is really just the expensive medicine required to cure corporate bloat.
That makes sense. The third headwind is a $1.3 billion charge for, quote, asset impairments. And for those not steeped in accounting jargon, an asset impairment is basically corporate speak for admitting that something you built or bought is no longer worth what you paid for it.
Yep, it's a write-down.
In this case, the sources indicate it was primarily related to physical retail stores that simply weren't working out.
And rather than keeping failing stores open just to avoid admitting a mistake, they shut them down and eat the loss immediately. Jassy really emphasizes this principle. You have to be willing to go back to the starting line. When a consumer experiment fails, or a technology fundamentally changes the landscape, you take the financial hit today to correct the course.
They did this exact teardown with Alexa, right?
Yes, they did.
Because Alexa has hundreds of millions of endpoints in people's kitchens and living rooms, but when the generative AI wave hit, Amazon realized the old, hard-coded architecture running Alexa just wasn't smart enough to compete.
Yeah, and instead of trying to just patch an obsolete system, they completely rewired Alexa's foundational brain from scratch. And they did it while simultaneously keeping the old system running so existing customers didn't experience a blackout.
Which has to be an incredibly disruptive, expensive engineering challenge.
Oh, massively.
But the result is that consumers are now using smart home functions 50% more because the system is actually capable of complex reasoning.
It's the willingness to break your own toys before someone else breaks them for you.
That's exactly it. So let's pull all of these threads together for you listening. Amazon in 2025 is a machine that generated $80 billion in profit by perfectly balancing a low-margin retail engine with highly lucrative ad networks and cloud services. Yet, despite being flush with profit, they are aggressively draining their cash reserves, spending over $128 billion in CapEx to physically construct the data centers and custom silicon that will power the global AI grid.
Right. They are funding the infrastructure of the future entirely out of their own pocket,
Yes.
fully aware that it means taking a $27 billion hit to their free cash flow in the short term.
Which leaves us with a genuinely profound final thought to chew on. In his letter, Andy Jassy notes that with AI, every single customer experience is going to be reimagined,
Everything.
even the ones that feel completely solved right now. He suggested that the very interface we use to interact with a digital retailer might disappear entirely. They aren't just looking at adding a slightly smarter chatbot to the corner of Amazon.com. They are staring at a completely clean sheet of paper.
For an incumbent that completely dominates the current paradigm, deciding to start from a clean sheet of paper is a terrifying but absolutely necessary existential leap.
Absolutely. So for you, the listener, here's a thought to explore on your own. If the company that defined online shopping is willing to tear up the blueprint, what does a post-website AI-driven retail experience actually look like?
It's a great question.
Because if we aren't scrolling through pages and clicking on a grid of product photos anymore, how do we actually discover and buy things in 2030? Like that massive national grid being built in an empty field, the cash is being spent, the foundation is being laid, but we are only just beginning to see what the final metropolis will look like. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the numbers behind the headlines, and we'll catch you next time.